If you watched my previous video about these wheels, you know that I had a bit of a mare. This one is totally wrecked. It's time to fix that. So the fitment for these wheels is perfect. Just a little bit of poke, but with the tire stretch, they fit kind of more or less inside the arches. But the problem I had was with the nuts. These use an older style of mounting surface here. So instead of being conical, it's a flat surface. And I found it really hard to find wheel nuts for them. And my solution at the time was to do, I could only find them in an M12 and get some adapters to bring them down to M10. That didn't go well. I ended up stripping one of the wheel studs. So I shelved them and went back to the cappuccino wheels. It's time to address that. So I finally found a company in Australia called Nice Products. It took a while to get here, obviously, but they are now the perfect size. As you can see here, they have a separate washer for a collar for that flat surface. They have a shank which fits inside the wheel, nice and snug. And they have an M10, which is what I need. So these fit in here. There is no hub-centric, you know, the hubs haven't got a lip to hang the wheel on. They're actually centered by the wheels. So this shank needs to be absolutely perfect, which it is. And it's time to get these wheels on. But while I'm at it, I'm going to try another job as well. When I bought the wheels, I also bought some springs from a company called Zoom. I got these from Japan, and I was going to fit them to see onto the standard shocks, just to lower a little bit to see if I can improve the looks of the new wheels on the car. However, somebody said really put me off that idea, which is that the way that this suspension works on the rear of this car, well, let me show you. So I'm here at the rear of the car and you can see the rear diff because this is four-wheel drive. There is this bar that runs from left to right, almost like a torsion beam or something like that. And then there's a second one that attaches to the subframe here. So this bar here bolts on, as far as I can see. There's one bolt and the other. I'm not exactly sure what the technical term for this is, but basically what I've been told is if you lower the car either on lowering springs or if you replace the shocks as well, that the actual whole axle will move to the left or the right, I'm not sure which. By looking at the car, you can actually tell they're not perfectly aligned. The right side seems to be out maybe only a tiny bit, like a couple of mil. But if I lower it, that'll be kind of exacerbated and it'll move further out probably. That's what I've been told. The way that you would correct that is you get an adjustable bar at the back there. And is it called a panhard rod? I don't know. Anyway, I'd have to get that from Japan. It's basically something that has a collar in the middle with a nut that you can spin and make it longer or shorter to bring that alignment back into check. But it's very easy to change the rear springs on a car like this where the shock and spring are separate. So it's going to be very easy for me to verify whether this is true or not. So I'm going to just swap in the springs and see what happens. If it's either not that bad, or if I want to go down the panhard rod, or buying those extra parts from Japan, I can put back on the stock ones and wait for it. If it looks fine, I can proceed with the fronts, which are more of a traditional coil on, coil over setup. Okay, wheels are off on the rear. This is what I mean by the separate shock or damper and spring. So this shock is held on by a 17mm bolt there on the bottom and one inside up here in the interior. But I only need to take the bottom off, and that should allow me to lower down, probably need to take off both sides, this whole subframe, or the diff housing and everything, so that I should be able to get the spring out. It's not under a lot of tension there, you can already feel when it's drooped down. Okay, at first glance, a little bit confusing. I suppose these look like maybe linear springs versus progressive, which means they're softer over small bumps, but then firm up as you get more into the travel. But I wasn't expecting them to be taller, so it might make it trickier to get it installed. There is obviously a bump stop here as well, which ideally would cut off if you're going to be running at a lower ride height. But I'm not going to do that straight away because I'm not convinced if I'm going to be using these or not. So I'll leave that in place. So let's just see if I can install that. New springs are in, new wheels are on. Nothing left but to drop her down. So what has happened to the alignment? I don't know if you can just see the tyre barely poking out of the arch there on that side. And very similar on that side. So it doesn't seem to have gone miles out of whack, which is good news, but it also doesn't seem that much lower. So it could be just a case that these springs need to sit and need to drive it for a while to see if they actually lower down. It's a lot more hassle to change the fronts because you obviously have to separate the shock and spring and then replace the spring and put it all back together again. So I think before I take that step, I'll put the new wheels on the front to have a full set, and I'll drive around with these Zoom springs on the rear and just see if they settle down at all. If they stay the same ride height, I'd be tempted to put the stock ones back in, but let's just see how it goes. So the car has been sitting for a few days now, and I have also taken it out on a couple of little short drives, and it's settled down on the rear a little bit. It's not really a massive drop though, and on the test drive I've discovered that it just impacts the ride a little bit too much, to be honest. I don't think it's hitting the bump stomps, but it's just a bit too harsh. So I wouldn't mind if it looked slammed or something like that, but it's barely noticeable, and I would rather keep the softness of the stock springs. So I'm going to put the stock springs back in, but generally speaking, this is how it looks with the wheels finally on. I think they're pretty epic. Very happy with that look. Slán.